Hi everybody, today I have three lovely, special and very summary male romance novels that I'd like to tell you about. Actually, I wanted to tell you about one absolutely amazing book in particular, but I decided to follow it up with two more just to give you some variety in my recommendations and so that you have different types and subgenres to choose from. But the first book that I'm going to talk about is one that if I had read it just a little bit earlier, I would have named it as my biggest surprise of the year so far in my mid-year book freakout tag. It is just such a little gem and so well done. I totally didn't expect that when I picked it up. I didn't have very high expectations for it at all, to be honest, because it is titled Hottie, Scotty and Mr. Porter, and the cover is just as ridiculous. Scott Yoon, the protagonist from whose perspective the story is told, is Korean American and currently lives in a small town in California with his sister, where he works as an emergency medical assistant and a firefighter. He is a smart guy, but he has an unfortunate tendency to get distracted by his own thoughts during conversations. And he also has a tendency to ramble about his workout and nutrition routine when he feels insecure or out of his depth. And that can make him appear rather daft at first or to the ungenerous eye. And that is why the leading ladies of the small town society see him as a bit of a git. And when they take on the project of finding a new partner for the school librarian, the widower Cole Porter, they don't even consider Scott. They even tell him so to his face. What would you two even talk about, they say. Little do they know that the two of them actually have a bit of a history, and Scott has been low-key pining for Cole for a few months, so the whole affair hits him pretty hard. All the more so because he has actually internalized a lot of the condescension with which he has been met by the townsfolk, but also by lovers in his past. And so the situation brings up a lot of insecurity and resentment. And Scott always oscillates between being outraged at having been passed over in the search for a boyfriend for Cole and anguish because he actually does feel inferior to some of the potential boyfriends that the society ladies come up with. But of course, he can't keep away and he can't help but keeping up with the development of the boyfriend project. And he is rather conspicuous in doing so. What's so great about the story is that it takes just about every cliche and trope that you can think of in contemporary romance and puts it on his head. And it's extremely funny, but also so poignant. It is told entirely from Scott's perspective, but there are many moments where the reader can see quite clearly that Scott is actually mistaken in his assessment of the situation and of Cole. And it's heartbreaking, but also extremely funny because Scott has such an endearing voice. He is so endearingly authentic and endearingly confused too. This is such a short story. It's just a little over 100 pages long, but it packs a punch and it's a real small gem. My second book could hardly be more different. It's Hell and Gone by Bauer. This is a western, or maybe a cowboy story is more to the point, although the cowboy MC actually takes offense at being called a cowboy. He manages a cattle ranch for an absentee landowner in the Crazy Mountains in Montana. And for some months, there have been cases of cattle theft on the lands of the 5 ranches in the area. And in addition, people have now started to disappear. And the MC's lover has been murdered. At least he thinks it was murder and not suicide. And he's finally had enough and gets the local sheriff to finally take the matter seriously and call in a so-called stock detective from Helena. And this stock detective is rather out of his depth in this close-knit and rough farming community whose history and dynamics he doesn't really understand. And the first half of the book is actually told from his perspective alone. So, as the reader, we come into this mess together with him as outsiders and gradually get to know the dynamics of the town and get to know the love interest, who is quite a mysterious figure. It's a really cool and interesting romantic suspense story. I particularly liked the character of the not cowboy, and I also liked that there was nothing much romanticized about that world, except maybe for the character of the cowboy. Sorry, the ranch manager. One thing that really grated on me, though, was that the backstory of the stock detective, which also informs his present character to a large degree, is a tragic and traumatic war story set in Afghanistan, where the terrorists are always bombing the schools that the humanitarian culture bringing Americans are building. And that made me want to throw the book against the wall every other chapter. And the author, Bauer, seems to be quite the all-American guy in general, at least if his choices of topics are anything to go by. It's always CIA, FBI, Secret Service, the war on terror, saving the world in the Congo, and Hello, Mr. President and White House drama. If I had known that, I probably wouldn't have picked this book up in the first place, so I'm glad I didn't know that going into it. My third book is again very different. It's called By the Korabong Skull by Welton Marsland, an Australian author, and the book is set in Australia too, as you might have already guessed from the title. And it's a historical. It's set in the 1890s in a small town in the bush near Melbourne. At least, well, it's a 2 days ride by horse or horse-drawn carriage. I guess that still qualifies as near in Australia, doesn't it? And there in that small town, our viewpoint character Matthew is appointed the new priest and vicar of the Anglican Church. And on the day he arrives, he meets the local police officer. There's just the one in that small town, plus his deputy. And together with a friendship, an attraction develops between the two of them. They are both in their 30s, but they have never before acted upon the same-sex attraction that they felt, because it never before seemed worth the risk that they would be taking by doing so. But that all changes now, and this is the story of how they make this relationship work and how they carve out a life for themselves, with the legal situation being as it is in 1890s Australia. This is gorgeously written and an absolutely lovely, rich reading experience. The small town setting really comes to life, and it's picturesque but also stifling in the way that only a 19th century small town can be. The main character, Matthew, is so realistic in the way that he wavers and second guesses and has difficulty coming to terms with everything, especially being a priest on top of everything else. And the love interest, Jonah, is so endearing in the way that he takes everything in his stride, at least outwardly, and has the courage to act on his feelings and thereby saves the relationship from disintegrating several times. And he's also so endearing in how unapologetic he is about himself and everything. This is definitely among the scanned handful of best historical romances that I've read. I think this last one in particular would appeal to people who are not actually very big romance readers in general. And it's probably the most ambitious one when it comes to writing style too. But I thought the first one, Hottie, Scotty and Mr. Porter, was actually the cleverest out of the three. I think they are all three of them probably somewhat off the beaten track, so I wanted to draw your attention towards them here. So in case you're still in need for a beat read, here are three great choices. I'll see you soon, guys. Bye.